I actually wasn't planning to do a holiday-themed episode this year, except that Saturday is my usual video release day, and Saturday happens to fall on Christmas itself this year. And keeping that in mind, I figured I really have no business talking about anything else. Happy holidays to you folks, whether you celebrate Christmas or not, whether you celebrate something else, whether you celebrate nothing. Best wishes to you. Now, I'm not going to do what I've done in the past. I am not going to be examining a specific piece of holiday-themed media, nor am I going to be doing any kind of list like I did with the Doctor Who specials, the Christmas specials, at one point. I thought about bringing that back, except then I realized that the newer specials that have come out since then have been New Year's and not Christmas, so the list wouldn't have changed. So maybe I'll revisit that just to see if the order changed at some point, but not this year. No, instead I found myself thinking on the subject of Christmas-themed television episodes. Now, first thing, I'm talking about episodes of an already running TV show, not Christmas specials. So get out of here with your Charlie Browns and Snoopy and the dinky little tree that falls over. That's not what we're dealing with here. We're talking about special holiday-themed episodes of shows that aren't just strictly there to do that. They're running the rest of the time of the year, and this is just a holiday-themed episode of a standard show. Now, I am not going to be giving you a list of the best ones or any kind of ranking, and I'm definitely not going to try and make a statement of what is the greatest episode of Christmas TV ever made, because that would require me to look up and watch an unbelievable amount of Christmas-themed television episodes, and there are neither enough hours in the day nor enough booze in my house to get me through a project like that. However, when I found myself looking over lists of Christmas-themed episodes, and in particular at lists that were focused on what are generally thought to be the best ones, I noticed some things in there, some patterns, as I tend to do. And that struck me as something that I do kind of want to talk about. Now, I'm not getting into any kind of deep analytical statistical analysis here. What I did was I looked up about a half dozen or so lists of what are supposedly the best Christmas episodes of television from various sources. Now, I didn't go through and laboriously calculate everything involved because there was a lot of overlap. There was some times where, one list would have an episode from a TV show that TV show is on another list, but they didn't pick the same episode. There's ones that just showed up on almost every list, etc., etc., etc. I was more interested in what kind of shows are thought to have the best Christmas episodes. Now, I am going to give you some numbers. These numbers are only coming from the list of 100 that I found. However, I do want to emphasize, while I was not in the mood to compile the data from all the other lists into a master list, I did make a quick comparison in terms of rough numbers to determine whether or not the percentage of types of shows of this type versus other types was similar across all lists. And it was. The genre of television that had the most was the one that had the most entries in each of these lists. And so what I was looking at was genre in the general sense. Genre has become a little bit of a nebulous thing, but I broke it down into several broad categories. Out of the 100, I was looking at sitcoms, children's animation, adult animation, dramas, and science fiction or fantasy. Now, there is a little bit of bending on my part. There are some shows that are kind of comedy dramas, but if they were longer than a half hour, I'm like, that's not really a sitcom. There were plenty of shows that I'd honestly never heard of, and I'm kind of leaning on having looked up the show and looking for what genre it's classified under when it gets listed on things like Wikipedia, IMDb, etc. So I'm not an expert on all these things, and people might disagree with some of my classifications. And like I said, I bent rules on a few places. Like, for example, I put Sesame Street under children's cartoons, even though it's technically not a cartoon. And I put The Simpsons under adult animation, even though it's not considered adult these days, especially compared to things like South Park and Family Guy. But that's still where I ended up putting it. Anyways, based on what I found, out of that 100, 64 were from episodes of sitcoms. 15 came from dramas. Adult animation and science fiction and fantasy had 8 apiece. There were 4 children's cartoons, and there was 1 Colbert Christmas, because while the Colbert Report was very much a comedy show, it also wasn't a sitcom, so I didn't know what to do with it. There's your random outlier. But I did find that that spread of data unsurprising, but also kind of interesting. It's always interesting when you kind of quantify something that you already suspect. Because you know what? In the back of my head, I knew sitcoms were going to have the most on this list. Now, again, nearly any TV show that runs during and very close to the holiday season is going to have at least one holiday, usually Christmas, episode in its run. That's always going to be what's happened. But the reason I zeroed in on this list of best was because that seems to give an indication of what type of television lends itself to celebrating the Christmas season well. And undeniably, it does look like sitcoms have the easy lead. Why is that? Is it because the holiday is laughable? It's a joke? No, but Christmas by its nature is, forgive me for saying it, it's a little bit silly. It's a little bit wacky. What we do, how we celebrate it, whether it be the things that the majority of us do, like putting a dying tree in the middle of our living room and then covering it up with artificial lights and baubles, or whether it be the strange things specific to any individual family's traditions, etc., etc. So there is a lot to play with in terms of keeping with the tone of a sitcom. Sitcoms tend to be lighter. And like some of these individual episodes were heavier episodes, but these shows in general tend to be a little bit more buoyant, a little sillier. They're not taking themselves that seriously. And Christmas really shouldn't be taken that seriously. I'm not saying your traditions shouldn't be taken seriously. Take them as seriously as you'd like. But I'm saying that it's supposed to be fun. And sitcoms are also supposed to be fun. So they align almost perfectly. It is interesting to think about when it shows up in other things, though, because a Christmas episode of a sitcom, that's kind of a no-brainer, isn't it? It just suits things. And most sitcoms tend to be family-based. And even the ones that aren't are still based around something that you can have a Christmas episode about. A workplace sitcom can center it around the Christmas party. Easy to do. But when you step outside of sitcoms and start looking at other things, you start getting something a little bit else. Something a little bit different. There's the dramas, which will often center on familial strife. Sometimes as a culmination of whatever the heck's been going on in the show up to that point, or sometimes as a unique situation if it's something more procedural like House or Boston Legal or what have you, which also makes sense. It makes sense that dramas came in second. I mean, it's a big gap. It's not close between sitcoms and dramas, but it does make sense that dramas are second because as much as Christmas is meant to be light and breezy and fun, it's not always. And usually if it's not, it's because of things involved with families and things that may or may not be going well with families. And drama can dig into that side of the holiday, which, while less pleasant, doesn't necessarily ring any less true. Now, I'm not just going to go down the order. I'm actually going to kind of jump to the bottom real quick. I was initially surprised at how few children's cartoons or children's programming were on this list. There were only 4. But then I thought about it, and I'm like, you know, even in the better children's television shows, the Christmas episodes tend to be very rote. They tend to just be, here's what my family's doing for Christmas, somebody's crisis about believing in Santa Claus, or they retell a Christmas carol. That's kind of it. And given how formulaic they tend to be, and how formulaic children's television is in general, if we're going to be completely honest, it's not that surprising that very few stood out. Because I guarantee you, there is a monstrously long list of episodes of kids shows with Christmas episodes. but they probably mostly suck. So that was sort of interesting to think about. By the way, if you're wondering if I have a grander point I'm building to, I really don't. I'm just having fun thinking about this. So if you're waiting for me to get to the point, I actually don't have one. I am not taking this all that seriously either. I'm taking the sitcom approach to this whole thing. I felt like I should say that before you sink any more time into this with me. Adult animation is a little bit of a sort of a shotgun genre. It can be all over the place, and by adult animation, it can be things slightly more grounded or more seriously flavored, like your King of the Hills. More often, though, it's going to be your South Parks, your Family Guys, your Futuramas, your more outlandish things. I find it interesting that at least from the ones that I recognized, a lot of those were more deconstructions of Christmas. They were more about making fun of the idea or of the traditions, or in general, taking the piss out of them. And not in a light, oh, these are our traditions, they're a little wacky way, but in a, isn't this dumb sort of way. Which, I mean, if we're being completely honest, a lot of adult animation tends to be very mean-spirited, which is a big part of why I don't watch a lot of it. But then there's the one that you shouldn't be surprised I kind of gravitated towards thinking about. Science fiction and fantasy. This is where you're going to find, well, your Doctor Who Christmas specials, for one thing. But then, in addition to that, your Eurekas, Supernaturals, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And the way that these kinds of shows choose to tackle Christmas, again, just judging by the ones that I have in fact seen, is a little bit odd. It can be one of a couple things. It can be something that is basically stepping out of the normal narrative of the story to fully dive into a Christmas thing, which is what Doctor Who usually tended to do. It could be a more or less standard episodes with some Christmas trappings, which is a little bit what the Buffy one did. I mean, the themes run a little deeper than that, but it usually is not just playing it straight, because when you're dealing with a sci-fi fantasy situation, well, things are going to get a little weird. And it's pretty common for these to in some way involve a supernatural Christmas thing, whether it be tied to belief in Christmas, whether it be like some weird twisted version of Santa Claus, whether it be some sort of holiday ghost, not necessarily doing Christmas Carol again, though Doctor Who did just straight up do Christmas Carol again. They tend to take these weird sideways angles at integrating Christmas into these things. And it's actually worth pausing to stop and think about how these sorts of things in general actually manifest in any of these shows. Because the Christmas episodes have a tendency to be some of the most meta, some of the most self-referential, some of the most nudging to the audience type of material. And I actually find that to be true in the dramas, in the sci-fi fantasy, definitely in the sitcoms. They get a little looser. Again, even the more serious stuff sort of usually feeling a little more playful with how they go about things. I also find it interesting that it's not uncommon for the only episode of a show to ever feature snow is going to be a Christmas episode. As if winter doesn't last for months. I have nowhere else to put that tidbit, but it kind of bugs me. I don't know when snow became exclusively Christmas's domain, because as someone who lives in Vermont, and winter is a long-winded season, yeah, no, Santa does not own snow. Let It Snow and Winter Wonderland should not be labeled as Christmas songs. They're just winter songs. Winter lasts longer than December. Tangent. Sorry, couldn't help myself. That's one of the weird quirks that bugs me. Now, some shows actually managed to hang a lampshade on that. Buffy did. It's set in California. They shouldn't be having snow. They point that out. Doctor Who, it actually was a running thing for a while that they weren't getting real snow. It was like disintegrating stuff in the atmosphere, or the Doctor caused it artificially or something. So like they almost made a running gag out of the fact that, yeah, there's snow, but it's not actually snow.
And it's snowing. I love snow.
But I think in general, what I really admire about the Christmas episode, and I say this as someone who has, engaged with Christmas my entire life, but never really as a religious thing. For me, it's a secular holiday. I know for some people it is deeply religious. It's not for me. It never has been, and I can't imagine it ever will be. But as someone who has had Christmas throughout my entire life, I do appreciate that when TV shows do Christmas, they feel some version of the holiday spirit. Whether it be literally having an episode about Christmas traditions, like in a lot of sitcoms, whether it be just having a slightly more festive tone to the overall thing, or even in the case of those dramas that I mentioned with all the family bickering, still bringing it to a nice conclusion is what the vast majority of them do. And I just like the fact that TV as a whole gets into the spirit of the holiday. Except for Black Mirror, because that episode of that show f***ing broke me. Whew. Anyways, what is your favorite Christmas episode of a TV show? Why do you love it? What about it speaks to you? I don't know if I actually have an answer for myself, because ironically enough, given how I opened this whole thing and pointed out the difference between a Christmas special and an episode of a TV show, it's specials that are kind of the backbone of my Christmas viewing. The animated How the Grinch Stole Christmas, Charlie Brown, Garfield Christmas, which is a special. His regular TV show didn't come out till later. But I suppose if I were to pick one, would actually be that first Futurama one where Robot Santa was introduced.
Come on, everybody. If you don't believe in him, he can't hurt you. Oh, God, the pain.
They did some good stuff with him later, but I really do get a kick out of that one. And it's one of the ones I will actually go out of my way to watch during the season. But whatever it is for you, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Thank you so much for your time. Like, share, subscribe, help me out. I got a Patreon if you're feeling particularly generous. 'Tis the season. Don't worry about it, though. Because at the end of the day, you are the council. I'm just running the meetings. This is the last meeting of 2021. And I will see you in 2022. Be well, be safe, be kind. You are beautiful. You are valid. And you are loved. Have a good one. None of this would have been possible without my supporters over on Patreon. In particular, I want to thank Robin Powell, Raven McBain, Tracy Scrabbit, Vincent Paul Bartolucci, Robin Moore, and Shayla Gourlay. If you'd like to hear me possibly mispronounce your name, maybe consider looking at the reward tiers over on the Patreon. But either way, don't worry about it too much. Take care of yourself.